at your next concert, I'll put it on the panel so people can go and
Wonderful.
yeah. Hey, Lily, thank you very much for doing that for us. That was awesome.
Thank you very much.
Lily Doak, who is a professional musician, indeed a professional recorder player. 5 to 5, the panel are NZ National. And on our final story where we had a lot of comment about, ever thought when you've reheated a curry or a pizza left over from the night before that it actually tasted better? Well, science has now discovered, in fact, it does taste better after being left in the fridge for a night. A food scientist and experimental psychologist at Oxford University, Charles Spence, has been looking at what happens to flavours when they've had a chance to literally chill together after being cooked again and again. So, around the panel, what do you think? Is there any real science needed? Because it's flavours. I mean, we know this, don't we, Alexia? That
Well, there aren't many leftovers in my household, I'm afraid. I'm very lucky to have something left over, and then certainly if I come home the next day, it's not there anymore. So, but yeah, I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? That spices infuse, and I mean, that's why you keep the crock pot going for 8 hours and just let it cook slowly.
Someone said you don't have to win an Ig Nobel Prize to know that leftovers are just gorgeous. Peter Field, what about you? Is there a favourite leftover for you?
Are you telling me really that the time you use cooking makes a difference? You can't just instantly cook everything?
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of a fan of wine. And, I think there's a saying that wine can grow with age. So I'll go with that liquid kind of leftover and say, boy, some old wine, I'll drink that.
Yeah.
Controversial leftover favourite, pavlova for breakfast.
Oh.
Better.
Have you ever tried cold KFC?
Oh, yeah,
That's
but
my
it's too
favourite
gluggy,
leftover.
too much glug.
Kia ora panel. My son is in his final year of college. For the last 5 years, he has always taken leftover dinner for lunch. His teachers are often envious of his fare. He loves his cold kai, and most dishes we cook are made with the next day in mind. Very economical, and we haven't bought a loaf of bread or made a sandwich for so long. Davina says curry in general is way better the next day, but specifically dal. It's a magic flavour. And another one here, reheated macaroni cheese, Wallace, especially if you've put a bit of cayenne pepper in it. Good for lunch the next day. It is absolutely delicious. Sounds good to you, Alexia?
I do make dinners with next day in mind, and they don't get to the fridge.
What's a favourite dish for you, Peter? If there was a go-to dish.
Man, I am hungry. Can we discuss this another time?
Well, there was quite a lot of feedback about you, Peter Field. People are really very interested in your responses. So here's one, finally. Wallace, a comment to your panellist, Peter Field. When Trump tells you who he is, we need to believe him. When he says he will dispute the election result, believe him. Final thought for us?
For me?
Yeah.
Again, I just think if Trump loses the election, there really won't be a problem in the United States. If Trump wins on November 3rd, I think there's more likely to be a problem then. Finally, my final thought, let's just hope that on November 3rd, the election is sorted out and that many states aren't contested because of mail-in ballots.
Hey, briefly, around the panel, who's going to win, Trump or Biden? Peter?
I'd put my money on Biden.
Biden.
Alexia Russell, Peter Field, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you for being on the show.
Thanks, Alexia.
I appreciate it. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, Friday show, 3:45. Thanks for all your feedback. Till tomorrow, see you.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei is Christmas cancelled for the All Blacks. The game scheduled for the Rugby Championship has them in isolation till Boxing Day at least. Who have they annoyed? An Auckland family infected with COVID had a weekend away before testing positive, mixing in big groups and hitting taupo tourist spots. We talked to Dr. Ashley Bloomfield about that and the All Blacks. A dentist warns patients self-medicating for severe toothache are risking overdoses. Further calls to reform hate speech laws to include religion. And it's a hard road ahead for the Hollywood track after it was smashed by floodwaters. And a drop of good news for Auckland, a tiny easing in water restrictions.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. A family of 3 with COVID-19 travelled from Auckland to Taupo while possibly infectious and met up with 18 people from around the country in breach of restrictions at the time. 31 people have now been identified as close contacts of these 3 community cases reported yesterday. Ruth Hill reports.
2 of the people had been in managed isolation in Christchurch and caught the charter flight to Auckland with another man who later tested positive for COVID-19. The Health Ministry says the family travelled to Taupo last Friday, where they joined 18 others from Bay of Plenty, Wellington, Christchurch and Hamilton. Another 13 people have been identified as close contacts, and all 31 are in isolation and being tested for COVID-19. Anyone who's visited Christchurch Domestic Airport, Debret Spa Resort in Taupo Tandem Skydiving and Just Cuts at Westfield St Luke's in Auckland at key times is warned to get tested if they develop symptoms. Ko Ruth Hill tēnei.
The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says the family did not deliberately set out to break the gathering restrictions in place for Aucklanders.
My sense is there wasn't any intent on their part, and also they were very assiduous in using the contact tracer app, so that's really helped us identify where they have been very quickly and notify those places.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. And an instructor at Taupo Tandem Skydiving is isolating after jumping out of a plane with one of the 3 family members who've since tested positive. Chief Executive Hamish Fennell says the instructor was wearing a face covering and a full face helmet, and the tandem diver was wearing a high-velocity style face covering. The instructor is being tested and the business is going through a thorough clean. There's no guarantee the All Blacks will play the final game of the Rugby Championship, with New Zealand Rugby crying foul over the schedule. The national body's upset that the All Blacks' last game will be in Sydney on December 12th, meaning the players won't be home for Christmas once they've had 2 weeks in quarantine upon their return home. Being home for Christmas was a bottom line as far as New Zealand Rugby was concerned. Chief Executive Mark Robinson says they'll continue to push for a change.
We'll keep working with Rugby Australia and SANZAR on those. So, we need to just take some stock now, go back to our people, have a conversation with team and management about where this sits with them, and then take things from there, really.
New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson. Labour's Jacinda Ardern is pledging to include religion in the country's hate speech laws if elected to government. Ms Ardern today unveiled a plaque at Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch to honour the 51 people killed in the March 15th terrorist attacks. She says while Labour couldn't make changes to hate speech laws this term, it will if re-elected.
I just think in a modern New Zealand, everyone would agree no one should be discriminated for their religion, and so it makes sense that we add this to the suite of other things we say it is just not okay to discriminate people over.
The Labour leader Jacinda Ardern, but National's Judith Collins says the change isn't necessary and the country's already robust human rights legislation would not have stopped the mosque terrorist. National MP Todd Muller says he had his first ever panic attack just a few days after he took over as the party's leader. Mr Muller rolled Simon Bridges for the job in May but stood down 53 days later. In a post on his Facebook page, Mr Muller describes experiencing night sweats, anxiety, nausea, sleeplessness and shortness of breath. He says with support from a specialist he's recovering well and is seeking re-election in his Bay of Plenty seat. Complaints against a National Party candidate's billboard have been dismissed by the Advertising Standards Authority. 2 complaints were received relating to funding pledges made on Lawrence Yule's campaign billboards in his Tuki electorate. In a statement this afternoon, Mr Yule says the authority has confirmed his advertising is not in breach of the Advertising Standards Code and the complaints were dismissed. It's 4 minutes past 5. SANZAR, the organisation which runs the Rugby Championship, doesn't believe the tournament is at risk of not going ahead despite New Zealand Rugby not agreeing to the schedule. New Zealand Rugby's upset the All Blacks' last game will be in Sydney on December 12th, meaning the players won't be home for Christmas once they've had 2 weeks in quarantine upon their return home. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
As far as New Zealand Rugby was concerned, the players being home for Christmas was non-negotiable. But SANZAR Chief Executive Andy Marinos says while he recognises the timing's a problem for the All Blacks, they've exhausted every other option, adding there's too much at stake for the All Blacks to pull out of the Four-Nation tournament. Marinos says they're already asking the players to play 6 tests in 6 weeks, and shortening that time frame wouldn't be good for player welfare. Marinos is hopeful the New Zealand government might relax the quarantine laws for the All Blacks upon their return. This is Stephen Hewson.
The New Zealand-born Samoan Rugby League player Mose Masoi has taken another step literally in his recovery from a serious spinal injury. Masoi has been videoed walking unaided. The 31-year-old prop was taken off the field on a stretcher while playing for English club Hull Kingston Rovers in January and was told that he was facing the rest of his life as a quadriplegic. Hollywood star Ryan Reynolds wants to buy Welsh football club Wrexham. The Deadpool star will put forward his vision for the club to members at a special general meeting. Any potential takeover could lead to $4 million being invested in the club, which has been in fan ownership since 2011. That's the news.
Auckland wakes up to level 2.
Today's change will mean that we're seeing more people getting out and about, but I don't think we're going to see the same surge that we had the first time round.
Protesters want justice for Breonna Taylor.
No one has been held accountable. This is injustice. This is why we said from day one we knew it was injustice.
And the Godwits make the long journey south.
This group of 4 that we have coming down the mid-Pacific are again heading straight for New Caledonia.
News as it happens. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Occasional rain today, fine spells tomorrow, a few showers in Northland. For Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Central High Country, rain, heavy at times easing tonight, fine spells and a few showers tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers spreading off the ranges until late tonight, otherwise fine. Wairarapa, Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Canterbury tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Otago and Southland, a few showers with thunderstorms possible in Southland and Clutha, then turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning. Bulla to Fiordland, showers, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms possible, easing tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, fine spells and a possible shower. RNZ National, 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The All Blacks are facing Christmas in quarantine unless their demand for a rugby championship schedule change is met. SANZAAR today announced the All Blacks' final match is set for the 12th of December in Sydney, meaning they'll need to isolate until at least Boxing Day on their return. New Zealand had been hoping the tournament involving Australia, South Africa and Argentina would last 5 weeks, not 6. But is it about Christmas in isolation or a breakdown in communication? During the program tonight, we'll hear from the Players Association, and a Sydney Morning Herald sports reporter gives us his take on the spoiling relationship between Australia and New Zealand rugby. Even the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, wades in. But first, this from our sports editor, Stephen Hewson.
South Africa are World Cup winners in 2019.
South Africa won the World Cup and the Rugby Championship last year, and already it appears the All Blacks are on the losing end again in 2020, without a match even being played. New Zealand Rugby's been blindsided by the schedule, having expected the last match would be on December the 5th, to give the players and management time to get home and isolate before Christmas. Chief Executive Mark Robinson says they're disappointed they weren't consulted before the final schedule for the Rugby Championship was announced.
We're working on the understanding that all joint venture parties agree to these sort of decisions. And in that regard, we were disappointed we couldn't reach agreement before a release was made.
Mark Robinson says they'll talk to the All Blacks management and players about whether or not they want to attend the Rugby Championship over the next few days. He says it's too early to say whether they'll be able to let some players come home early should they desire. Last week, Rugby Players Association head Rob Nicol told RNZ's Extra Time being home for Christmas was non-negotiable.
All the team's going to have to deal with is the fact that we've got to be out of Australia by the 6th of December. That's kind of the date that everyone's talking about. So clearly the draw has got to be looked at very closely and be quite innovative, but you're looking at 6 test matches over 5 weeks to make sure that no one is in quarantine over Christmas, because that was never going to work for anyone.
After seeing the December 12th finish date, Nicol said the Players Association wanted a compromise that would allow players to be out of isolation by Christmas Day.
Because we haven't actually agreed to that. And I think New Zealand Rugby have been clear that they haven't agreed to it either. But, hey, we all want to make this happen. You know, we want to make the tournament happen. So what can we do? Can we go back to 6 games over 5 weeks? Can we do something around quarantining? What can we do to solve this problem? So we'll just focus on that. And, hey, It's not the first problem we've had this year, and it ain't going to be the last.
Asked in a media conference if the scheduling was SANZAAR's way of getting back at New Zealand Rugby over its plans for a revamped Super Rugby competition, Mark Robinson doubted political games were being played.
This is not anything we're taking personally or anything like that. It's just the reality of the scenarios that are being put up.
You paint a very still a rosy but perhaps fractured picture with SANZAAR. Is there ever a point where you just say, "Hey, kiss our ass, see you later"?
No. These things happen in partnerships. You know, you work through them, and it doesn't diminish our commitment to SANZAAR for the future at all.
At a political level, though, Labour leader Jacinda Ardern indicated her understanding from previous discussions was that players would be home for Christmas.
There was an agreement that those games would conclude by the 6th of December, and if everyone sticks to that, then there wouldn't be an issue.
Well, this was National Leader Judith Collins' response.
Gosh, that's a bit sad, isn't it? That's a bit sad.
SANZAAR Chief Executive Andy Marinos accepts the date is an issue for New Zealand, but he says they've exhausted every option in trying to rearrange the schedule so the All Blacks could be home for Christmas. He says they're already asking the players to play 6 tests in 6 weeks, which is arduous, and shortening that time frame wouldn't be good for player welfare. Marinos hoped the New Zealand government might relax the quarantine laws for the All Blacks upon their return. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
It's been revealed an Auckland family infected with COVID-19 holidayed in Taupo and broke alert level rules by gathering in large groups before they knew they were infected. The cases are linked to a man who tested positive 5 days after completing managed isolation in Christchurch after flying in from India via Fiji on August 26th. The man flew home to Auckland from Christchurch on September 11th. 2 other people from that flight and a household contact of theirs have subsequently tested positive. Now, I talked to the Director General of Health about whether isolation rules could be loosened for the All Blacks. But first, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield explains where the infected family has been.
This family made a trip down to Taupo about a week ago, so Friday the 18th, and then returned to Auckland on the 20th, actually, because they were called on the Saturday evening, the 19th, by our contact tracing team after they were identified as having been on that flight, the charter flight from Christchurch to Auckland. So they did a trip to Taupo on the Friday, Saturday, and then returned to Auckland Sunday, went into self-isolation and were subsequently tested.
Who have they been in contact with during that time?
Well, actually, while they were in Taupo, they met up with several other families who had travelled from various places around the country, and they did a number of activities with those families over the weekend. Those families have then gone back to their places of residence, so Christchurch, Wellington, Hamilton, another Auckland family, and Kawerau, and they're all being followed up. Each of those families has been followed up by the local public health team. That they've all been contacted yesterday, are in isolation and are being tested as well.
So this family normally resides in Auckland, and during the time that they travelled, their alert level would have been 2.5, and they're supposed to take that with them when they travel, right? Your press statement says that they met up with 18 people. Is that right?
Yes, so there was a total of 18 people amongst the group they sort of gathered within in Taupo. So yes, not ideal in this situation, in that they did meet up with a group bigger than 10, which was the maximum gathering size for people in Auckland, although Aucklanders could travel outside of Auckland, of course. What I would say is I don't think, my sense is there wasn't any intent on their part, and also they were very assiduous in using the contact tracer app, so that's really helped us identify where they have been very quickly and notify those places.
So regardless, though, they did break the rules?
Well, that was the recommendation and request. So, yeah, I mean, not ideal that they did, but we've also, of course, been able to identify everyone that they had contact with very quickly and get those people into isolation and tested.
So in total, how many close contacts have you identified now?
Yeah, 31 so far. 18 of those are from the trip to Taupo, and other close contacts are from the people they had come in contact with while they were in Auckland before they made that trip down to Taupo.
So I understand that one person did a tandem jump and there was a dozen people on the aircraft with them. Are they all considered to be close contacts?
Look, I'm not sure if the Public Health Unit would have assessed them as close contacts or casual contacts. They'll be following that up, that's for certain. And our tendency at the moment is, of course, to anyone who's been in a place like that to ask people to self-isolate and be tested and not leave self-isolation until that test result comes back negative. Those who have spent more time with them, the identified close contacts, will spend the full 14 days, even if they return a negative test. That at the outset they'll still be asked to self-isolate for 14 days and be retested towards the end of that period.
It was a tandem jump, so the person they were strapped to, would that be a close contact?
Oh yes, that would be a close contact, yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that the family group that they met up with have all dispersed back to the Bay of Plenty, Wellington, Christchurch and Hamilton. So you've got a big outward spread here. Are you worried about that in terms of the people they were in contact with?
Well, I'm not worried per se because these families were able to be identified quickly and asked to isolate and did and have been tested. So that in itself, the fact that they're geographically spread around is not an issue. But obviously we'll be wanting to get the test results back from them, which we'll expect later today and tomorrow morning. And of course our hope is that those will be negative. If there are any positive ones, then they will be followed up. We're also testing contacts if there are positive tests. So a couple of these people live in flats with others, and those people have been asked to self-isolate until we get the test result from the person who was on the table trip. And a couple of them, because they can't really self-isolate safely at home in the sense that they've got flatmates, they've actually gone into managed isolation facilities, which is, again, really helpful.
How many have done that?
2 have done that, yes.
Okay. So are you expecting the group of close contacts to get considerably bigger, given you've identified, their presence at Christchurch Domestic Airport, hot pools at Debrett's Spa in Taupo, and this tandem jump, and just cuts in Westfield St Luke's? So are there more people to track down?
The close contacts are the ones who would have already been tracked down pretty quickly. So if you think about the haircut, just cuts, then perhaps the person who did the haircut would be a close contact. They would have been followed up early, and then we move on to the casual contact. So we're not expecting the group of close contacts to grow that much larger. They're the ones who we prioritise to identify and isolate and test.
So I'm wondering, given that obviously the recommendation was that people from Auckland kept their alert level when they travelled, and this group didn't do that, are people justified in having a fear of Aucklanders and sharing company with Aucklanders?
No, I don't think necessarily they are, but I think it is a really good reminder that there is some, there is a good reason behind these recommendations, and even as we go into the school holidays, starting in just a day or two, a reminder to Aucklanders. Great, they will be travelling around the country, and it's good that we're in a position that they can do that, just to be mindful. And the advice for anyone, and this is again how we've got on top of this, is because late last week, a fellow from the flight, even though he had been right through managed isolation and tested negative twice, he developed symptoms and he self-isolated and got tested. And so my plea is, I think this is for anyone around the country, is if you do have any symptoms, do isolate, do stay at home and get tested. That's how we will keep ahead of this virus.
So to be clear, is it a disappointment that they didn't follow the rules when travelling?
Oh, look, it's disappointing, but I should also say that, it's a reminder to all of us that we have these measures in place for a good reason. So let's all continue to do what we need to do, and a reminder to Aucklanders as they come up to the school holidays to do the same.
Are you any closer to knowing exactly how they got COVID from the individual that you think the contact was with?
We're not any closer. It's still looking at all the possibilities. There was the original flight out of Delhi, though that would have meant a long incubation period. Whether something happened inside the managed isolation facility, we need to keep an open mind about that, and also on the charter flight. What I would say is that the person who was identified as a case on Saturday and the 2 family members in this latest group who were on that same flight, they were in adjacent rows on the charter flight. So what we're really looking at is the whole genome sequencing will tell us what who was infected first. We'll shed some light on that, and we should have that in the next day or two, so that will be really important in us being able to put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Okay, can we take a slight turn here and talk about rugby. I know you're fond of the game, but also
I am indeed, yes.
The All Blacks, right? So it's come out today in terms of their schedule overseas and their return. It looks like they would be stuck in isolation through Christmas. Is there any chance of changing the rules? Has there been any request to change the rules around that, and would you consider it?
Well, what I do know is that there's an ongoing active discussion between the two rugby unions here and Australia, and I imagine that conversation will happen. I've spoken directly with Mark Robinson from NZ Rugby and continuing to provide my advice. Of course, at the moment, the government policy is really clear that people coming into the country need to do the 14 days in managed isolation, and so we'll keep working with the rugby union, and I know they will keep working with their counterparts across the ditch.
So are you saying if there was to be any shift, it would have to be a political shift? It's not in your wheelhouse to be able to make this decision?
A policy shift. Well, I think what I'm focused on in my advice, and as New Zealanders would expect, is what is the standard for assuring the safety and maintaining public health here in New Zealand. And at the moment, that includes 14 days in managed isolation for people coming into the country.
What if they stayed in some kind of bubble in Australia for the final week?
Well, we've just been asked to have a look at that proposal, and we're developing some advice on that, and we'll keep in touch with the rugby union. Again, I think they've still got an active discussion with their counterparts across the Tasman.
So it's not a hard no? Things are still under consideration?
Oh, look, I think we're always looking to see if we can make things work, and there's still a couple of months ahead of us. There's a lot of water to flow under the bridge still, isn't there, before those matches even start. So let's just see what happens.
Would you like them to be out of isolation on Christmas Day, before Christmas Day?
Oh, I would love them to be out of isolation, and I don't think anyone would necessarily want to be in isolation on Christmas Day. And at the moment, though, the schedule clashes with the mandatory 14 days we have here back in New Zealand, and we'll need to keep looking at options for how we can find a way through it.
And that is Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. It is 22 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think of that. All Blacks potentially, banged up for Christmas Day in isolation. Should the schedule change so that they can get out earlier, or should they just suck it up? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Imam of the Al Noor Mosque is calling for a reform of the country's hate speech laws to include religion. Jacinda Ardern unveiled a plaque at the mosque today to honour the 51 worshippers killed in the March 15 terror attacks. She later promised to include religion in the country's hate speech laws, a move National's Judith Collins has ruled out. Our reporter Annika Smith filed this story.
We surely belong to Allah, and to Him we shall return. So read the words on the newly unveiled black plaque at the Al Noor Mosque. There were smiles and tears at today's formal unveiling, 18 months after the massacre and 1 month after the closure of the criminal court case. Gamal Fouda, Imam of the Al Noor Mosque, puts it best.
We felt the arms of many New Zealanders around us all over again, and we have witnessed the support and the love in front of the court again, as it was after 15th of March.
Jacinda Ardern, who had covered with a gold hijab, was greeted at the mosque with flowers. The significance of the occasion wasn't lost on anyone.
We are very happy that it's not cancelled this time. Beautiful.
Today was the third attempt at a plaque unveiling. The first was meant to be at the March 15 memorial this year, which was cancelled as the borders began to close. The second was scheduled for the second week in August, also postponed by COVID-19 after the second outbreak in Auckland. Mr. Fouda says New Zealand was forever changed by March 15 and he doesn't want it to be forgotten. He says part of that should include enacting world-leading laws that draw a clear line between freedom of speech and hate speech.
In many occasions, freedom of speech becomes hate speech, and hence turns into hate crime, as we have seen it in 15th of March terror attack.
If Labour is re-elected, Ms Ardern says changes would be made to the country's hate speech laws.
We haven't been able to deliver that last term, but my intention would be, if we're able to form government, that we would. I just think in a modern New Zealand, everyone would agree, no one should be discriminated for their religion. And so it makes sense that we add this to the suite of other things we say it is just not okay to discriminate people over.
But National Party leader Judith Collins says this isn't necessary. She says New Zealand already has robust human rights legislation that wouldn't have stopped the man behind March 15.
I'm not going to give an excuse to a mass murderer that someone said something to him and made him think like that. He's a mass murderer, that's it. He should wear what he did, and he should spend the rest of his life thinking about what he did and regretting every moment.
The Ministry of Justice and the Human Rights Commission were tasked with reviewing the country's hate speech laws in the aftermath of the terror attacks. However, that review has not yet resulted in any changes. Mō te hōtaka o te yahi, ko Annika Smith tēnei.
And as you heard there, Judith Collins is out on the campaign trail and she's made a bold call today, claiming Jacinda Ardern hates farmers. It's part of National's fierce attempt to put agriculture back on the agenda, accusing Labour of taking farmers for granted. National is promising to unwind much of Labour's reform this term. It unveiled its plan in Gisborne while Jacinda Ardern was in Christchurch. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Is everyone smiling?
Jacinda Ardern is used to smiles on the campaign trail, showered with praise as she swept through Christchurch.
Oh, Jacinda, I'm your number one fan.
Excuse me, Jacinda, can my friend get a photo with you? You can.
And I really do appreciate what you've done for the country.
Thank you so much.
But that appreciation is not universal. Talk to some farmers, they'll tell a different tale.
All we've got out of Labour is criticism of everything we've done. They just don't want to know.
If Labour stay in, we won't have farmers. They'll be gone.
You're kicking the lifeblood out of New Zealand for a start.
And it's that sentiment Judith Collins is seizing on.
See those big bulls out there? Don't go in the paddock, okay?
The National leader was in Gisborne today meeting local farmers, preaching that National is the party for them.
I just love the rural New Zealand because that's my home.
She used the chance to roll out the party's agriculture policies, a suite of largely already announced promises. Among them a pledge to scrap the RMA, to review or repeal 9 water standards, and to alter the Zero Carbon Act. A big commitment too. Judith Collins won't bring farming under the emissions trading scheme.
I'm not going to do to our farmers what no other country does to theirs, okay?
The supposed rural-urban divide was a major talking point last election. Ms Collins wants to revive it.
Our policies are very much about doing things better, but working with farmers and not demonising them.
And she senses a chance to target her opponent directly.
I don't know why she hates farmers so much.
But Jacinda Ardern is pushing back.
Absolutely not. In fact, we've been working alongside our primary sector to develop up these solutions. We have the same goal.
Both Labour and the Greens say National's plan would put the country back decades.
To undo all of that work does take us backwards and means that we will still have waterways that will make people sick when they swim in them.
The National Party, frankly, are out of touch with the farming community these days. I mean, all the farmers that I speak to around the country are really concerned about the environment. They want to be part of the solution.
The real colour of the left, it is a very murky green. It's not about the environment, it's all about envy.
Jacinda Ardern has called this the COVID campaign, but Judith Collins is clearly not prepared to let that alone define it. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A Christchurch hospital dentist says people are coming close to death in order to manage the pain of untreated dental disease themselves. Within the last 2 months, at least one person a week is being admitted to ICU at Christchurch Hospital over untreated dental infection. Alicia Foon spoke with dental care specialist Juliet Gray, who says people have been overdosing to manage agonising dental pain.
What I see is that to get dental care in New Zealand, if you can't afford it, you literally have to nearly be dying. So when you turn 18 in New Zealand, there is no more public funding for dental care unless you get into quite extreme strife or you have very specific medical problems and you need to go and have dental care at the hospital dental services. That is a very, very small part of our community. So everybody else have to pay for their own dental care. People get pain from untreated disease, but that pain, when left untreated, can become extreme. So toothache is worse than childbirth. The pain from a pulpitis is extreme, and that pain can last for days, while the nerve is very irritated and then will finally die. So what I see on the human side now is when people have this hideous, agonising pain, they do all sorts of things, and we're seeing that in the hospitals. When people come into Christchurch Hospital with drug overdoses from paracetamol or anti-inflammatories, when they try to manage this terrible pain. I see people coming in who've self-mutilated or self-harmed if they've tried to extract their own teeth with screwdrivers. And that's because they don't have the money to go and pay for private dental care. There are some subsidised schemes, but they are very limited capacity, and not even every DHB has a hospital dental service or emergency dental contract. So in Christchurch, we have a hospital dental service, but only 2 out of 3 DHBs in New Zealand have hospital dental services. And an even fewer number have emergency dental contracts.
In terms of numbers, what are you seeing?
In Christchurch, over the last 12 months, there have been 24 people admitted with dental infections that have caused, they're so severe that the swelling around their tooth and mouth has impacted and critically risked their airway. It's getting worse. 1 person per week in ICU with a dental infection that has needed ICU airway support and maxillofacial surgery management of the infection. So we're going from 2 per month over the last year to, in the last little while, 1 per week. So what I see is people who have heart infections, and the bacteria that are causing the heart infection have come from the mouth and are now infecting the heart. This year alone, I've seen people with heart infections, lung abscesses, spinal infections, all related to untreated dental disease and the bacteria from your mouth getting into other parts of your body. These people need days in hospital and usually 6 weeks of intravenous antibiotics given to them via a central line out in the community. The real risk, fear and pain and literally agony that people are going through to get dental treatment is just mind-boggling. It's making me increasingly worried for our community. We think it's tough in Christchurch and the limited access to hospital dental services, but it's a whole lot tougher in other parts of New Zealand where there isn't a hospital dental service and there isn't an emergency dental provider. So what do I want? Community water fluoridation, sugar tax, and access to emergency dental care for all New Zealanders of all ages. So we have an ability to have our pain and infections managed.
And that was Christchurch Hospital dental care specialist Juliet Gray speaking to our reporter Alicia Foon. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, is Christmas in isolation the least of New Zealand rugby's problems? Has the relationship between them and Australian rugby soured? A burnt convention centre, 2 lockdowns, a drought and a broken bridge. The past year hasn't been great for Auckland, but finally some good news. Water restrictions are being eased. And work is set to get underway on an access road to a popular Fiordland track after it was partially wiped out by floodwaters. We would love your feedback. What do you think of the scheduling for the Rugby Championship and the fact that the All Blacks could potentially be locked down in isolation for Christmas? Should the game schedule change? Should they just suck it up? Or should we change the quarantine and isolation rules for them? Get in touch, text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
There's no guarantee the All Blacks will play the final game of the Rugby Championship, with New Zealand Rugby crying foul over the schedule. The national body's upset that the All Blacks' last game will be in Sydney on December 12th, meaning the players won't be home for Christmas once they've had 2 weeks in quarantine upon their return home. A family of 3 with COVID-19 travelled from Auckland to Taupo while possibly infectious and met up with 18 people from around the country in breach of restrictions at the time. 31 people have now been identified as close contacts from 5 different locations. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says the family did not deliberately set out to break the gathering restrictions in place for Aucklanders. Meanwhile, an instructor at Taupo Tandem Skydiving has been tested and is in isolation after jumping out of a plane with one of the 3 family members who've since tested positive. Labour's Jacinda Ardern is pledging to include religion in the country's hate speech laws if elected to government. Ms Ardern today unveiled a plaque at Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch to honour the 51 people killed in March 15th terrorist attacks. But National's Judith Collins says the change isn't necessary. National MP Todd Muller says he had his first ever panic attack just a few days after he took over as the party's leader. Mr Muller rolled Simon Bridges for the job in May but stood down 53 days later. In a post on his Facebook page, Mr Muller describes experiencing night sweats, anxiety, nausea, sleeplessness and shortness of breath. Fire crews have been working to extinguish 2 fires along train tracks in Christchurch. Crews were called to lines between Brougham Street and Ensors Road just after 3:30, then to a second fire on rail lines near Ferrymead Park 10 minutes later. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and you've tuned in just in time for business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, FMA, the Financial Markets Authority, is running out of patience with some firms and reckons it's going to clamp down. Who are they unhappy with?
Yeah, they've put out this report today after taking a really close look at the financial services industry. So this can range from people who issue shares to people who give financial advice. And while they found that a large number of entities are doing everything they can, they're working hard, they're meeting their obligations, there's still a significant chunk that are really lagging behind. And where they found the main areas of issues are in terms of governance, oversight, and how they handle customers. And just some examples, they found some real weaknesses when it came to how they managed customers' needs. You know, are they working the best interests of the customers? Are they keeping that in mind? They also found that many firms failed to handle vulnerable customers appropriately, and they actually found that many firms also had some poor systems in place when it came to processing customer complaints. On top of that, they found cases where the directors of these firms didn't actually know what obligations they had to adhere to as financial entities. So the FMA isn't really painting a really pretty picture here of the industry, but they aren't mucking around. Earlier this week, they've already started going after some of these firms. They've targeted a derivatives issuer, that's a firm called CLSA Premium NZ, which they said failed to meet its audit and assurance obligations, and they've temporarily banned this firm from taking on any more retail investors. And what the FMA have said is that this is just one example. They have a range of tools that they can call upon to sort of take action against companies. They say this is sort of on the lighter side. One of the things they can do is actually just pull a firm's license, which would effectively, cancel its ability to trade. So that was just a derivatives firm. What they're also eyeing up are authorised financial advisors, because they say that people need absolute confidence when they seek financial advice, because they're making really big decisions based on the advice they're receiving. And I guess what we're seeing today is that the regulator is really flexing its muscles, and I guess we just have to wait with anticipation to see what other firms they have in its sights.
Okay, let's move on to, COVID-19. But businesses are being reminded that the virus is not their only threat in the future.
Absolutely.
So what are the other ones?
So today we heard from about 150 businesses. They've banded together, and what they're doing is that they're hoping to make sure that climate action doesn't fall by the wayside amid the disruption caused by COVID-19. So today the big announcement was the Sustainable Business Council. They've teamed up with their Climate Leaders Coalition. So, these are obviously competing firms in the space, but they're really banding together to press action on reaching a zero carbon economy. So what we're really seeing here is private business leaders. They're looking at the future. They're saying we need to do a lot more work in this area, but we're actually probably better if we all work together. So one of these organisations, the SBC, they will remain independent. The SBC, what they're going to try and do is really work on public advocacy, public relations. They're going to host all these events, try and get more businesses on board. They're also going to really work with liaising with the government and the Climate Change Commission. The CLC, on the other hand, what they're going to be focused on is encouraging businesses to really reduce their emissions. By that, they have these pledges that they want businesses to sign up to, and they're also going to encourage businesses to report annually on their emissions, which is sort of like what the Green Party has advocated for, is what they'd want to roll out if they were elected in the next government. So I guess what they're also saying is that, look, COVID-19 there was a real concern that this would become this immediate focus for businesses, and which is completely understandable, but not to forget about those long-term concerns. Climate change is a real existential threat, and they say there's lots of lessons to be learnt from the way businesses and government have reacted to COVID-19. They say we've seen the public sector and private sector really band together and meet these headwinds front on, and they say that sort of laid out a roadmap for what businesses need to do for the future with regard to climate change.
Okay, shall we take a trot around the markets?
Yeah, quickly. With the NZX top 50 is down ever so slightly, but about 0.1% to 11,704. Our dollar is at 65.3 US cents. That's as the US dollar really picks up. 92.7 Australian, 51.3 British pence, and gold continues to slide down nearly 0.5% to $1,854 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news. Auckland Council has chosen to slightly ease water restrictions, but the region's water woes are far from over. Restrictions on commercial users will be eased first, but when restrictions on residential users will be loosened is yet to be decided. The continuing water crisis still weighs heavy on councillors' minds, with the city's dams currently just 67% full, compared to 90% this time a year ago. Jean Bell reports.
The plan proposed by the Water Authority Watercare will see restrictions on commercial users eased on October the 12th. Businesses will be able to use outdoor hoses with a handheld trigger nozzle, and commercial car washes can also operate. But there is no promise on whether residential users will be given more water to splash around with. The council will revisit restrictions on households in December, taking dam levels and the summer rain forecast into consideration. Mayor Phil Goff cautions against lifting all water restrictions in light of a dry forecast.
Will anybody thank us if at the end of this process we lift the restrictions, only have to slap on even worse restrictions within a couple of months because we're running the risk?
Mr Goff also worries about the impact of climate change going forward.
I'm really worried that we haven't built climate change into this, and that we will get a third year's drought in a row. Every morning I wake up praying for bloody rain, but it's not happening, and I can't guarantee it.
Watercare made the proposal based on Aucklanders' good response to current restrictions, with savings exceeding the 5% expectation. It also pointed to weather forecasts, which estimate spring will bring more rain than originally anticipated. But it warns further severe water restrictions may be necessary if this rain doesn't fall. It is also banking on new water sources, including from the Waikato River, to bring in an extra 71 million megalitres a day by June next year. Councillor Josephine Bartley took aim at Watercare's public messaging on the drought so far. She doesn't think Watercare can get the message across to Aucklanders to continue conserving water, even though water restrictions might be eased.
But there just still doesn't seem to be that sense of consistency in messaging that we are in a drought, that this is a crisis.
Councillor Richard Hills is concerned about history repeating itself.
Our dams looked mighty fine during last summer, but then we very, very, very quickly drained them. And, it is a risk that happens again.
This morning, dams were 67% full. Watercare has set a goal of getting dams 75% full by the end of October. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei ko Jean Bell tēnei.
Work will get underway on an access road to a popular Fiordland track soon after it was partly wiped out by floodwaters. Locals have been calling for the road into the popular Hollyford track to be opened for summer walkers. Today, the Southland District Council and Waka Kotahi met with other stakeholders to discuss what to do with the road and finally give the community answers. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Fiordland was battered by a metre of rain that fell over 2.5 days in February, trapping hundreds of tourists and workers in Milford Sound and severely damaging roads and tracks in the area. The Lower Hollyford Road was no exception. Jules Tapper is the co-founder of the Hollyford Tourism Company and has been flying in the area for the last 60 years. He started an online petition in August calling for the road to be repaired, which more than 3,000 people have signed.
17 k's to walk before you start your walk, sort of style. That would be ridiculous. People would be put off, and that would affect the number of people that would be visiting places like Te Aha. They wouldn't visit the area. So I'm glad that they've got the project started, which is there's no more sitting on their hands.
Waka Kotahi Lower South Island System Manager Graham Hall says today's meeting highlighted the importance of the road to the community.
I think their discussions today really honed in on the need for this, and it became apparent this is a significant part of New Zealand. There might not be a lot of vehicle traffic in there, but this road is really vital and important, both culturally and for the tourism in the future and the national park.
Waka Kotahi will fund up to $400,000 to repair the first 11 kilometres of the road, from the intersection with the Milford Highway into the Hollyford Valley. Graham Hall says work should start within 10 days and be finished by the 20th of December, depending on the weather. But the costly challenge will be the remaining 5 kilometres.
There is one section, and it's basically now the river. On the side of that area is some national park, which has significant trees, and so you'd want to avoid disturbing it. That significant price of $2 million is to basically build a wall to shift the river out of this area and to rebuild the road up.
A working group of stakeholders will investigate what to do with the remaining section of road. The options include closing it and turning it into a track, or re-establishing it back as a functioning road. Jules Tapper welcomed today's decision, saying it's a pragmatic choice.
17 k's to walk before you start your walk, sort of style. That would be ridiculous. People would be put off, and that would affect the number of people that would be visiting places like Te Aha. They wouldn't visit the area. So I'm glad that they've got the project started, which is there's no more sitting on their hands.
But he is disappointed at how long it's taken to come to a decision.
Well, it's been far too long, to be quite honest. The thing is that we're approaching summer now. They're going to have to get their skates on and get things done. Admittedly, they do have some gear in the area and some expertise, and they probably can start almost immediately. But just in case they strike any problems and a bit of bad weather along the way, it would be nice to think that they could actually make sure they can get it finished in the next month or so, because that's when the walkers start arriving.
Graham Hall says he understands the frustration over the timing, but the Milford Highway was the priority immediately after the floods. The group will meet again by mid-next month, with hopes there will be a decision made on the remaining section of the Lower Hollyford Road. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, TNA.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. So many people are getting in contact about the prospect of the All Blacks being stuck in managed isolation on their way back from Australia with their last game over there in December. And, well, not too many people with sympathy for them. This one says, All Blacks, poor wee things. Someone else says, I just want to ask the question, why are they still trying to play rugby in summer? I'm not hearing anything about cricket and the traditional one-dayers on Boxing Day. What are they going to do? Rugby needs to move on and end the season. Someone else says, would someone please tell the All Blacks to put on their big boy panties and grow up? They are not the only people in the world who will be separated from family at Christmas, and they're being paying huge salaries. If they don't want to do the job they're being paid to do, they should resign and let someone else have the money. And another one says the All Blacks are like any other New Zealanders, and if they were to be anything different, they should be great examples and good role models. Many people suffer all kinds of inconveniences by playing to the rules of COVID, and I'm sure the All Blacks wouldn't want to do anything less. They are part of our whole country as a team. Keep that feedback coming. You can text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The national body of Kura Kaupapa is accusing the Ministry of Education of institutional racism in the way it prioritises total immersion Māori schools for repairs and rebuilds. A Christchurch kura has been riddled with mould and leaky buildings for the past 10 years. It says the Ministry of Education initially told them the school would be rebuilt, but then changed its mind. But whilst both groups are meeting to find a resolution next week, the national body of Kura Kaupapa is furious. It says the ministry isn't acting fast enough. Mani Dunlop reports.
Christchurch's Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Te Whānau Tahi has been waiting more than a decade for the dilapidated, mouldy and leaking school to be rebuilt. In March, it was finally told a rebuild would happen. But after the first lockdown, Ministry of Education officials told them it was off the table due to funding issues because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Whilst the ministry has since apologised, the Kura's Deputy Board Chair, Anton Matthews, says he'll be meeting with them next week to deliver an ultimatum, rebuild the Kura in an acceptable timeframe on the current site.
I mean, if we don't get that outcome, then we'll look at our further options and probably look to take further action. I mean, the Ministry of Education is pretty smart, they're pretty intelligent, and I think they understand their obligation under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and so we hope that it won't get to that point. But look, all options are on the table if the Ministry turns up and decides to brush us off like they have done for the last 10 years.
So a treaty claim could be on the table, potentially?
Certainly not ruling that out. Yeah, absolutely.
Mr Matthews says the whole process has been distressing for whānau, and he says they just want a solution.
They know that it's taking a huge toll on the mental health of our kaiako and our whānau, who work tirelessly to make sure that our tamariki don't feel the stress and the pressure of having to live and learn in a kura that's unfit for purpose. So despite knowing all of that, their communication has been inconsistent, to say the least, and it's becoming frustrating. They argue it's been unprofessional, and we just think enough is enough and it's time to walk the talk like they keep saying they're going to do.
The co-chair of Te Runanga Nui o ngā Kura Kaupapa, Arawari Wright, says Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Te Whānau Tahi is not an isolated case. He says there are kura which are in dire need of repair or rebuild and have been forgotten.
This is another example of institutional racism at work, because in this instance, the Ministry of Education has been very slow in coming forward to help Te Whānau Tahi, but they're not the only ones, because there are other kura kaupapa Māori around the country who are in far worse situation. And it is absolutely appalling. The Ministry ought to be ashamed of the conditions that we have had to continue to endure year by year.
Mr Wright says kura kaupapa are exceeding at much higher rates than many other education institutions, and high school retention rates remain high for students. He says there has been some good working relationships with the ministry established, but meaningful engagement is now needed.
Do they go far enough? No. In terms of legislation and in terms of regulations, the ministry has done nothing to support and promote the protection and the development of kura kaupapa Māori. We need to sit down again with the ministry. We need these concerns to be acknowledged, and then we need to see an action plan that needs to be put together on a case-by-case basis.
In a statement, the Ministry of Education rejects any suggestion that decisions on school property investment are based on race. It has reiterated its commitment to work in partnership with Christchurch's Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Te Whānau Tahi to find the right investment option for the kura, but does not want to preempt upcoming discussions. For Checkpoint, ko Mani Dunlop tēnei.
Turning youthful aggression into a constructive career is behind a mentorship program set up by one of the biggest names in New Zealand's thriving mixed martial arts scene. Dan Hooker is ranked 5th in the UFC's lightweight division, just one spot behind Irish megastar Conor McGregor. But the fighter known as the Hangman isn't content with hanging his hat on his own career. Clay Wilson and video journalist Dan Cook went to discover more about Dan Hooker's passion to bring through the next generation of Kiwi combat sports talent.
Watching on over a class at his Combat Academy gym in Auckland, Dan Hooker has plenty of reason to smile. The Kiwi UFC star loves to coach just as much as he loves to compete.
This sport saved me. This sport gave my aggression a direction, and I could channel it into this is the most constructive thing you could possibly do with your aggression.
That first-hand experience is also behind the mentorship program Hooker has created. The program offers aspiring youngsters several perks, most notably the chance to have their career guided by Hooker himself. Trials for the second edition of the program are set for this Saturday, with 70 invited from a list of 120 applicants. Hooker says it's a process about much more than just strength, skill and athleticism.
I'm looking for those intangibles. I'm looking for those natural gifts that some people possess. And to find them, you have to do some pretty deep digging, let's say that.
Aaron Toe knows just how tough the day will be. One of two winners when Hooker first put mentorships up for grabs in 2018, he remembers the gruelling testing process and what got him over the line very well.
My spirit kind of just took over, and it ignited a bit of a flame inside me that just, I knew that this was the place that I wanted to be, and I was going to fight for it like it was my life.
Determination driven by a challenging upbringing. Raised in Rahiri, a small settlement in rural Northland, Toe grew up around domestic violence and gang affiliation. Initiated by his mother, a move to Australia during his teen years brought some stability. But Toe says finding MMA was the real catalyst for change. And after winning the scholarship under Hooker and moving back to New Zealand with his young family, he's setting an important example for those close to him.
For all of my nephews and nieces and cousins and friends, there's a new way to live now. Like you can channel all those things that are inside you that could have defined you in a bad way, people could frown upon you for, and now I'm channeling them into something that's so positive, someone wants to pay me to do it.
For Tururai Te Wano, Saturday's trial day is the next step in reaching the same place. The 20-year-old moved north from Taumarunui just 3 months ago and says MMA has also been an avenue to turn her life in a positive direction.
I was in a spot where I didn't know what I was going to do and didn't really wasn't working towards anything, wasn't challenging myself for about 3 years of just doing nothing, and then this just made me work, and I've been working.
That includes being at the gym 6 days a week, while also working as a kohanga reo teacher. Te Wano says the success being had by Hooker and several other Kiwis on the world stage, including world champion Israel Adesanya, makes it easier to stay motivated.
That energy, it goes across everyone, so everyone here is inspired by them, so then you're just feeding off others' energy that they got from Dan and the rest of the team.
The inspiration flows both ways. Hooker says coaching and helping the next generation gives him more than enough fuel to balance his own busy career and responsibilities at his gym.
I'm going to be fighting for a very long time, so if I wait until I finish, I feel like I would have missed out potentially 10 years of building something. So it's just building something, building a gym, building a community with the knowledge, with the skills I have that can help as many people as I can.
That process continues on Saturday. And having had 2 years with Dan Hooker in his corner, Aaron Toe says it's an opportunity which can't be overstated.
This opportunity could change someone's life, and it has for me. It's fully changed my life.
Moti Hotaka o te ahipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
On the subjects of the All Blacks potentially having to stay in isolation over Christmas, you've got a lot to say. Albert puts it succinctly: All Blacks, suck it up or just stay at home. A lot of you agree. This person says, tough titty for the ABs, no special treatment, they get paid the big bucks. If New Zealand Rugby can't get their act together, then the players should have an out clause, says Patrick. Another person says, give me a break. I think of all the people who work Christmas Day. When I was a nurse, I was one of them. All the police, fire, medical staff, plus many others, often working whole blocks over that period. I'm sure rugby players are paid well and can handle working in isolation on Christmas Day. This listener says the All Blacks should definitely have to obey the same rules as anyone else. To give them some dispensation makes a mockery of the quarantine. Then the cries would be, if the All Blacks don't have to follow the rules, why should we? On and on it goes, although some people reckon they should just abandon ship on the last game. The All Blacks should just walk away after the 5th week, says Peter. This smacks of underarm syndrome. Someone else says many people over the past few months have not been able to see loved ones, attend funerals, see ill whānau or be at milestones in families because of the quarantine rules. They obeyed those rules. Suggesting the rules get altered for a rugby team seems unfair and very selective and just belittles the efforts made by all New Zealanders. Not a good look, in my opinion, says Helen. Someone else says this problem could go any way. In previous years, I've worked on Christmas Day and do appreciate the team's feelings. Regardless, the quarantine rules should not be eased for anyone, let alone a group of well-paid sports people. And another listener says the All Blacks in isolation isn't important. On the one hand, we're talking about a new cluster.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Work is underway to avoid forcing the All Blacks into COVID-19 isolation over Christmas. New Zealand's last game in the upcoming Rugby Championship will be against Australia in Sydney on December 12th. Under current rules, players and staff would then need 2 weeks in quarantine upon their return home, preventing them from being at home on Christmas Day. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield told Checkpoint that he's been asked to look at putting the team in isolation whilst still in Australia.
We're always looking to see if we can make things work, and there's still a couple of months ahead of us. There's a lot of water to flow under the bridge still, isn't there, before those matches even start. So let's just see what happens.
Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield. The Lakes District Health Board has released more taupō locations visited last weekend by a family who didn't know they had COVID-19. 2 of the family of 3 left managed isolation in Christchurch and returned home to Auckland on the same flight as a positive COVID-19 case. Another family member then joined them on a trip to Taupō to go skydiving and visit hot pools. The Health Board says they also visited the Z petrol station in Tūrangi late on Sunday morning and Subway and KFC on Robert Street on Sunday afternoon. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says it is disappointing and not ideal that the family met up with 18 friends in Taupō, despite gathering limits of 10 for Aucklanders. He says it's a reminder to Aucklanders to keep their local alert levels in mind as they approach the school holidays. National's Judith Collins says changing hate speech laws to include religion is not necessary. Labour's Jacinda Ardern is pledging to include religion in the country's hate speech laws if elected to government. Ms Ardern today unveiled a plaque at the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch to honour the 51 people killed in the March 15th terrorist attacks. But Judith Collins says New Zealand's already robust human rights legislation would not have stopped the March 15th terrorist. She says she will not excuse the terrorist's actions by saying speech affected his choice.
I'm not going to give an excuse to a mass murderer that someone said something to him and made him think like that. He's a mass murderer, that's it. He should wear what he did, and he should spend the rest of his life thinking about what he did and regretting every moment.
The National leader Judith Collins. Advertising complaints laid against billboards by the National Party's Tuki candidate Lawrence Yule have been dismissed. A member of the public complained that Mr Yule's billboards implied that funding for an upgraded hospital and highways in Hawke's Bay were a done deal. But the Advertising Standards Authority found the billboards were not in breach of its code. Mr Yule says the funding is a done deal if National wins.
Well, I feel vindicated. I always thought there was nothing wrong with these political ads. We're simply advertising that fact. And it's a pledge, and I'm comfortable with the adverts. I always was.
National MP Lawrence Yule. The authority says the ads clearly signal the intentions of the National Party. 2 officers have been shot in Louisville as thousands of people take to the streets to protest following a grand jury's decision not to charge anyone for the death of Breonna Taylor in a police raid in March. Demonstrations are also taking place in other US cities. CNN's Jason Carroll is in Louisville, where a curfew is being ignored.
Both of those officers are, at this point, non-life-threatening injuries. A suspect is in custody. As the evening wore on, as we got closer closer to the curfew, it became more and more clear that some in the crowd were becoming more and more agitated. We saw some starting to light fires. And again, want to bring it back to Breonna Taylor and her family, because as you know, I've spoken to her mother on more than one occasion, and she made it very clear while she wanted protests to continue, she wanted them to be non-violent, certainly not the way it ended this evening.
Jason Carroll in Louisville. A small Canadian start-up has helped keep a Wellington couple's virtual reality film on the international festival circuit. Miramar Creative Centre's Raki Syed and Aretio Ekavaria spent 3 years on a 20-minute VR film, only for COVID-19 to arrive. It meant international festivals due to show their film could not physically happen. They were saved by the Museum of Other Realities, an interactive location created in Vancouver that only exists in virtual reality. Its co-founder Robin Stetham says the festivals were hosted alongside the museum's other exhibitions.
In some cases, we would work with creators to stage a room around their exhibition, and then there's kind of a pillar of light, and if you wave your hand through the pillar, it takes you into the experience by that team.
Rob Stetham. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. New Zealand Rugby doubts SANZAAR's decision to release an unapproved rugby championship schedule was an attempt to undermine it. New Zealand Rugby has a strained relationship with its SANZAAR partners Australia, South Africa and Argentina, and its proposal earlier this year to revamp Super Rugby, leaving out South Africa and Argentina while reducing the number of Australian teams. As you've heard in the news, the new rugby championship schedule would mean the All Blacks would be in quarantine over Christmas. But New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson says they never agreed to that and want the All Blacks' final game to be played on December the 5th.
We're just saying it's a highly unusual year. The fact of the matter is we're still committed to playing these games. We just have to find another way of being able to do it. So we're talking about one game in this whole schedule of 12 games, and we think we can find a way forward.
Mark Robinson. The Wanaka cyclist Michaela Harvey is hoping her good showing in last week's tour of Italy will set her up for this week's World Road Championships in Italy. Harvey finished 5th overall in the Giro Rosa, the event considered the biggest on the world tour. Harvey will compete in the individual time tonight alongside Georgia Williams, and Niamh Fisher-Black will join them for this weekend's road race. And finally, 5-time world darts champion Raymond van der Beneveld has announced plans to come out of retirement and attend the qualifying school in 2021. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We've learned about these new cases on the same flight, but we don't know who gave it to who.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
And hopefully we're helping business owners work out where to go next, or how to get over a hurdle, and or just to have someone that's a sounding board for them.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Occasional rain tonight, fine spells tomorrow, a few showers in Northland. Waikato to the Kapiti coast, including central high country. Rain, heavy at times, easing tonight, fine spells and a few showers tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers spreading off the ranges until late tonight, otherwise fine weather. Wairarapa, Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Canterbury tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Otago and Southland, a few showers, thunderstorms possible in Southland and Clutha, then turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning. Bulla to Fiordland, showers, some heavy, isolated thunderstorms are possible, easing tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, fine spells and a possible shower. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. New Zealand Rugby has been left blindsided and angry after SANZAAR released the draw for the end-of-year Rugby Championship, forcing the All Blacks to spend Christmas in quarantine. The draw sees the All Blacks playing their final test against Australia on the 12th of December in Sydney, ending a week later than the team had initially anticipated. The All Blacks had been hoping the tournament, which also includes South Africa and Argentina, could have included a midweek test and played over 5 weeks instead of 6. Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, told us earlier in the program he's been asked to look at a bubble arrangement that could trim isolation time. But at the moment, the rules rules for everyone are the same, 14 days. Author and former Wallaby Peter Fitzsimons thinks there's still time for things to change. He believes New Zealand rugby will get its way and have the All Blacks home with their families for Christmas Day. Speaking to Checkpoint reporter Nick Trubridge a short time ago, Fitzsimons says the All Blacks are used to holding sway.
The heart of this competition is the All Blacks. And if what the All Blacks want, it's not everything that the All Blacks want they get, but when they pound the table shakes.
What would it do to the competition if, say, the draw did stay the same, and let's say we have some of the marquee All Blacks saying, well, the isolation rules haven't looked like they're going to budge and that's not acceptable to us. What would that do to the competition?
You undercut the whole story. I can tell you a Jonah Lomu story that you will recall in 1995 when Jonah Lomu burst onto the international stage. None of us had ever seen anything like him, and there was a brilliant piece written about him in the Sydney Morning Herald. Matter of fact, I wrote it, where I described Lomu as a freight train in ballet shoes. One person that was watching this, when rugby went professional, there was a huge fight between Rupert Murdoch and Kerry Packer, the two media magnates, as to who would own professional rugby. Murdoch in London saw that game played by Lomu in the semi-final against England, where he got the ball on 7 occasions. He scored 4 tries, set up 2 tries and put one Pommy in hospital. And Rupert Murdoch said, I have to have that player. Basically, he said to his people, I don't care what it costs. I don't care how we go about this. I need to have that player on my books. That dictum still applies, that when you can't have a half-assed All Black team. You've got to have a whole lot of them. So if players were to drop out because of it, you just undercut the whole competition. You undercut the value of the win, the victory, or the match. You cut away at the TV audience. You can't do that. The administrators have to make sure you have a full deck All Black team on the paddock, not simply 15 men wearing black jerseys.
Our reporter Nick Trubridge talking to former Wallaby Peter Fitzsimons. And joining me now is Sydney Morning Herald rugby writer Tom Decent. Hi Tom, you seem like the right person to ask this next question. Is it decent to have the All Blacks stuck in isolation and quarantine at Christmas?
Oh, look, it's absolutely not. I mean, let's just get it straight that no one, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, SANZAR want that situation to happen. I mean, when New Zealand were probably going to be hosting the Rugby Championship, Australia were worried about that being the case for its players, and totally understandable that New Zealand are as well. So it's a situation that no one wants to see, but there's a lot to probably play out at the moment. The ball, I guess, is probably most in New Zealand Rugby's court by way of speaking to the government and trying to work out some provisions there by way of maybe even doing a hard lockdown in Australia and then doing a week back in New Zealand so then they could be with their families over Christmas. There's even talk of maybe trying to do the isolation in New Zealand in their home, so if they did have to go across to Christmas time, they could do so. But, look, it's not a situation that anybody wants. And there's a lot of factors at play in this, in what's transpired today.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those factors. Have the All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby annoyed someone?
Look, I mean, possibly. There's clear implication that Australian rugby is behind it, but it's not necessarily the case as well. The obvious issue is having 6 games in 5 weeks, which is clearly not something that everyone is on board with. I know Argentina and South Africa have actually said that they don't want to do that. They've barely been playing any rugby for that matter, and that they would prefer to have the 6 weeks stint and play 6 games over that period for player welfare reasons. SANZAR boss Andy Manaros has talked about that at length today. So they feel that the only way to squeeze that 6-week block in is to play that final game on December 12th, which currently at the moment, obviously, New Zealand are not happy about. The other factor too is broadcasters. Now, there's massive dollars being thrown around. All 4 unions need this money into their coffers to pay for their players, pay for everything that goes with the game. And broadcasters have said unanimously they would like 6 Saturday games across 6 weeks. And ideally, at the moment, that lands with a December 12th finish. So you would imagine the easiest solution is for an agreement with the New Zealand government to have their players either relax those quarantine restrictions or some other agreement. Otherwise, and there's all sorts of theories as to why New Zealand Rugby has taken this path today.
But is there some niggle or bad blood there between Australian rugby and New Zealand rugby that may be contributing to this impasse?
I think New Zealand rugby are very upset that they didn't get the rugby championship. It had been it was theirs to lose, and they lost it by way of the quarantine restrictions imposed by the New Zealand government. Clearly, they were an issue, and that's why Sanzar awarded it to Australia. Look, Australia were pretty happy about it, and they were happy to trumpet that it was a win. And now they have a 6-week tournament here in Australia that everyone will love over here. And, understandably, New Zealand rugby fans were livid when that happened. And that flowed on to New Zealand rugby, clearly not too thrilled about that. Is there a rift? I think Australia were upset today at the assertion that that New Zealand rugby had allowed or agreed to a 5-week competition when they were going to be hosting the Rugby Championship. I mean, Rob Clark, the Rugby Australia boss, came out in a statement just saying that for absolute clarity on 2 formal occasions, Rugby Australia was supportive of altering the draw so that it could be played over 5 weeks, and both occasions that was, rejected. So the implication being that New Zealand rejected that. Now, Australia actually said, when New Zealand came to Australia and said, we would like a 5-week tournament, Australia actually said yes, we would be more than happy to accommodate that. But what's being lost in this debate is that the fact that Argentina and South Africa actually said no, and Sanzar, over the top, being the joint venture, decided that was probably not the way they wanted to go. So, look, I mean, probably beneath the surface there is a bit of animosity between Australia and New Zealand, and it also stems from the issue around Bledisloe fixturing as well. I know Australia said they wouldn't come over for Bledisloe's games, and they managed to get better quarantine restrictions there. So there's heaps at play, but it's definitely I don't know if we would say bad blood, but it definitely is not the best spirit at the moment between the two countries.
I know the suggestion is that in some way the All Blacks should be getting some concessions here in terms of quarantine and isolation, but our rules are pretty tight. So what are the prospects that the ABs will just walk away from the last game or just threaten a boycott and follow through?
I mean, they would, but that would also have ramifications for broadcasters, and if New Zealand Rugby were to do that, they would be in breach of contractual obligations, and then therefore that's a significant amount of money as well. It would be pretty tough on them to ask Australia to come over and play the 2 games in New Zealand, and then when the shoe's on the other foot, say, no, we're not going to do it. Interestingly, when Australia were in the same situation when they wanted to play the Rugby Championship in New Zealand, Australia said, hey, look, we don't want our guys in hotel isolation when they get back to Australia. What can we do about that? And New Zealand said, bad luck, not our problem. Talk to your government and we'll deal with it then. Shoe is on the other foot right now, and ironically, New Zealand are kicking up a stink. So there's definitely some rugby administrators in Australia who are laughing about that now. Not laughing, but notice how once New Zealand had lost the Rugby Championship and realised, hey, we may have players in hotel quarantine for Christmas, that they've changed their tune slightly, and we know the New Zealand government are very strict with their protocols, and Australian rugby has had to work hard with our government to try and loosen those restrictions as well. So if I was a betting man, I would say that New Zealand government would come to the party. And we have to remember this is 3 months away as well. A lot can change in that time as well.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Tom Deason, Sydney Morning Herald rugby writer there. A lot of you getting in touch about this particular topic. Amber wants us to tell the ABs this. Remember, Santa has a magic key so he can still deliver prezzies to MIQ. Thanks for that, Amber. A lot of you are saying the All Blacks should be in isolation on Christmas Day, no concessions for them. Stuart says the All Blacks don't want to be in isolation on Christmas Day. The answer is simple. Return to New Zealand on or before the 10th of December. Problem solved. Malcolm says, for goodness sake, if it's that important to the All Blacks, the New Zealand Rugby Union should put the players' families in quarantine when they return to New Zealand. It would be a great way of showing appreciation to our players' ambassadors. Steve's got in touch to say the idea of running the Rugby Championship in Australia this year is cloud cuckoo land thinking. South Africa is a hotbed of COVID-19. The Argentinian rugby team is too. Sanzar needs to get real, says Steve. Someone else says, All Blacks, suck it up. I've worked 10 years away from the family every Christmas. Joys of the job. And this listener, change the play date. If not able to, no exemptions should be made for anyone. Other people haven't been able to attend family burials. The rules should be applied evenly, even for sport. Keep it coming. It is 18 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A man has given a harrowing account of the consequences to his life after going into state care in the 1970s. Earl White, which is a pseudonym, has given evidence to the Abuse in Care Royal Commission sitting in Auckland. Mr White was physically abused by his father and stepfather before going to Epuni Boys School in Hokio Beach School. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the hearing.
On arrival at the Epuni Boys' Home, Mr White was placed in a secure unit for a few days and only allowed out for 1 hour a day. As a young boy, he was totally bewildered.
I remember sitting there crying, wondering what was going on, frightened of being locked in the cell.
He says a kingpin structure existed where older boys assaulted younger ones. Mr White doesn't remember getting much formal learning.
For education, I didn't receive any education apart from learning how to steal cars and break into houses and shops.
At Hokio Residential Home, sexual abuse started.
I know from records that I was taken off the Hokio school premises on 13 separate occasions. This would be often be with other boys. We would go to Mr. house or for a drive to the beach or to the bin. When we went to his house, he would take boys into his room.
Mr White left state care at the age of 15. He says what followed were years of alcohol and cannabis addiction, burglaries and eventually 2 prison terms.
It might be hard to understand, but I found the periods I spent in prison easier than the time in the welfare homes, because the prison guards were doing their jobs and they were more caring and I felt safer at night.
Mr White says he's been trapped in a life of crime and drugs and health issues related to cigarettes, which he started smoking at the age of 7. He has one wish.
Try and do something for my children and grandchildren before I die, because as it is at the moment, if I die, I'm just a burden on them because they can't afford to pay for any funeral.
He describes the 12-year process of seeking redress as a nightmare.
The Crown treated me like the defendant in a criminal trial rather than a victim of abuse. The whole process made me leave feeling re-traumatised and abused all over again.
After a number of settlement offers were turned down by the Crown, his case ended up in the High Court, which accepted the findings of abuse, but his financial claim wasn't successful. The Ministry for Social Development ended up paying him $25,000 with an apology. Mr White describes both as a joke and insult. For Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae.
To the US now, where large protests are taking place in several cities after it was revealed no police officers would be charged over the killing of Breonna Taylor. Ms Taylor, who was a hospital worker, was killed by officers during a botched drug raid on her apartment in Louisville in March. A grand jury has charged one police officer over the fatal shooting, not with Breonna Taylor's death, but with wanton endangerment for firing into a neighbour's apartment. That sparked widespread protests in which 2 police officers have been shot and injured. CNN's Jason Carroll with this report.
Former Detective Brett Hewson faces 3 charges of wanton endangerment in the first degree. 2 other officers who responded that night with gunfire, Jonathan Mattingly and Miles Cosgrove, were investigated but do not face any criminal charges.
According to Kentucky law, the use of force by Mattingly and Cosgrove was justified to protect themselves.
The charges against Hewson are in relation to shots he fired that ripped through a neighboring apartment.
Based on the evidence, there's nothing conclusive to say that Detective Hankison's, any of his bullets hit Miss Taylor.
In the months following Taylor's death, there has been much speculation surrounding the details of what happened the night on March 13th when police showed up serving a no-knock warrant. The Attorney General says evidence shows officers Mattingly and Cosgrove knocked and identified themselves before breaching Taylor's door. And he says there is an independent witness to corroborate their account. But Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, disputes that claim. Walker says he didn't hear police announce themselves and thought someone was trying to break in, so he fired a shot. Police have said that shot hit Mattingly in the leg.
All of a sudden, someone started beating on the door. They refused to answer when we yelled, "Who is it?" 15 minutes later, Brianna was dead from a hail of police gunfire.
The Attorney General says an FBI analysis determined the shot that killed Taylor came from Cosgrove.
Jason Carroll reporting. What happens when you spend 3 years working to create a virtual world for international audiences, only for a pandemic to disrupt it? A Miramar creative duo took their own personal and painful experience and created a short film entirely in virtual reality. Checkpoint caught up with them 2 years ago when they were partway through the project, destined for the Sundance, Cannes and Tribeca film festivals, to name a few. Rachel Thomas returned to Miramar to find out how they navigated the international film circuit during COVID-19.
With one hand, just grab and pull up. And then you're going to be right exactly where you need to be. You can just rotate around a little bit.
That's director Rugby Syed giving me a quick tutorial on what to do with my hands in the fictional world I'm about to enter. It's a virtual reality film she spent 3 years creating with husband Areto Echevarria. Called Minimum Mass, it's about a couple trying to conceive.
I don't see anything. Even at 8 weeks, I would expect... I'm sorry, it looks like a blighted ovum. You'll probably experience a natural miscarriage. Or look, if you prefer, I can schedule a D&C.
No, I don't understand.
It means there's not going to be a baby.
I don't understand.
I'm really sorry.
This isn't just their world, it's their story. Before they embarked on this project, the couple suffered 3 miscarriages. Rugby Syed says immersing themselves in the subject for the next 3 years was like a very intense form of therapy.
It is very intense and emotional, and I think that has caught up with us at different times throughout the making of this project, and the need to share the actual emotional journey with key creatives and stakeholders so that they understand what we're trying to do and come along with us. It's been tough.
It's been tough, but I mean, I think one of the original motivations was because it's a topic that's not really talked about very much in society, and particularly I think with men, it's something men don't talk about almost at all. So I thought it was really valuable. We both thought it was a really valuable conversation to have.
Their own story has a happy ending. Now they have a healthy toddler son. But Areto Echevarria found working on the film meant returning to a tough place. They completed the project in February, just as COVID-19 began affecting a long line of international film festivals where Minimum Mass was due to play. Artists can spend years trying to make the selection, and cancellations would mean they would not get to show their work for years. In stepped Renee Pennell, the chief executive of Kaleidoscope, a network for artists working in VR. He usually runs events in the real world, but was tasked with finding a virtual venue for the Cannes Film Festival, Tribeca and RAM, a virtual reality festival in Hamburg, so anyone with a headset could attend. It meant people could see Minimum Mass from their own homes.
And a key to all of this is the right venue. And just like doing an event in the real world, the right venue can make all the difference. To be frank, most spaces in VR that are being built for social gatherings are aesthetically really painful, and places that I'd visit and I'd be like, oh, I can't wait to get my headset off. This is really, it's hurting my eyes and my delicate artistic sensibilities. But we eventually found a place called the Museum of Other Realities.
The Museum of Other Realities is a place of curated art people can visit like any other museum, except it exists only in VR. Robin Stetham is the co-founder and chief executive of the startup based in Vancouver, Canada.
If you were to go to the More today, you would see just a collection of world-class art from artists all over the world working in VR, presented in its native medium. And so you'd be able to walk around, animated floating sculptures, or experience like jumping down into a landscape painting that's three-dimensional.
The film festivals were hosted in spaces in the museum alongside regular exhibitions.
In some cases, we would work with creators to stage a room around their exhibition, and then there's kind of a pillar of light, and if you wave your hand through the pillar, it takes you into the experience by that team.
Areto Ajavaria says although the couple couldn't physically be at festivals, artists were still able to mingle in the VR world, even going to a party in virtual fancy dress.
The party was starting and I was like, I'm just going to put on my Mexican wrestler avatar, and then I was like, I need to go look myself in the mirror and see if maybe I want to change, maybe I want to be a banana today.
The couple want to encourage artists to experiment with bold storytelling in VR. Miramar Creative Centre, where the couple are based, has banded with Kaleidoscope for a grant for New Zealand artists, which they hope will help other projects take flight. Minimum Mass will play at several virtual film festivals through to the end of the year, including ones based in Paris, Montreal and Denmark. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
Some of you are getting in touch about the Auckland family with COVID-19 that took a trip to Taupō and want to know which places they visited. We'll put it up on our Facebook page, but it's Debrett's Hot Springs, Taupō Tandem Skydive, Z Petrol Station, Subway and KFC in Roberts Street. But we'll put all the details up on our Facebook page. In terms of the ABs, pretty much overwhelmingly, you don't want the rules to be changed for them. This person, Grant, says the AB should shove it to the Aussies by wrapping up the competition early and going home before the last match. Another listener says her son is an essential worker due home around December. It's his birthday, and he'll have to go in isolation. Can he join the All Blacks, is the question. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Director-General of Health Ashley Bloomfield will investigate if there's a way for the All Blacks to avoid COVID-19 isolation over Christmas if they play in the Rugby Championship. A family of 3 with COVID-19 travelled from Auckland to Taupō while possibly infectious. 31 people are close contacts. 3 people are in police custody in Whanganui after members of the public reported hearing gunshots. No one was hurt. A film will be made about the life of Captain Tom Moore, who raised millions for the UK Health Service. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Gerard Hudson, very excited about the drop to level 1 outside of Auckland because it means full steam ahead for next month's Wellington Folk Festival. Our Changing World presents the science of mowing lawns and whether it's time to let the grass grow a little longer. Eric Brenstrom has a global weather report.